English is the world's lingua franca, meaning a common language used between people whose native language is different.
And because of this, it's fairly easy to get by just knowing English. So why don't more people just learn English? The thing is, languages are so much more than just communication. They're closely intertwined with different cultures and ways of life.
Experts believe there are more than 6,000 languages still spoken around the world today. But in today's increasingly globalised world, in Australia, only 1 in 5 of us speak a language other than English at home. So should we all be learning another language?
Our ability to use language with all its complexities and rules is one of the key ways that we distinguish ourselves from other animals. Nearly all modern languages are just changed forms of much older languages. Over time, changes in language create dialects, and those dialects go on to become new languages.
Take Latin, for example. As Latin spread throughout the Roman Empire, different regional spoken varieties began forming. And after the fall of the empire, these varieties kept evolving to form new languages. Those living in neighbouring villages were able to understand each other thanks to a dialect continuum forming. As modern nation-states began to form and arise, certain languages were chosen to be the national language of these new countries. You might have heard of them. They include Parisian French for France, Tuscan Italian for Italy, and Castilian Spanish for Spain. These languages, amongst others, are part of what's called the Romance language family. Not that type of romance, this type of romance. There are millions of native Romance language speakers around the world, as well as native speakers of a host of other languages. In fact, English is only the 3rd most spoken language in terms of native speakers. There are far more non-native English speakers in the world than there are native speakers.
English, being a lingua franca, is picked up by a lot of people as a second language, in that they learn English in an English-speaking environment to get by. For example, my first language was Cantonese, and I picked up English in preschool. And while different languages don't completely change the way you see the world, they can influence the way you think.
For example, Gugumutha, one of the Aboriginal languages in North Queensland, doesn't have words for left, right, up or down. Instead, they refer to the position of things using north, south, east and west. So instead of being in front of the house, you might be to the south of the house, which reflects the way those speakers think about the space around them. And in some other languages, you're obliged to give more information. For example, in French, you couldn't simply say my neighbour. You'd have to choose between voisin or voisine, male or female. And in other languages, such as Japanese and Korean, there are different ways to speak to someone else, depending on how much respect and politeness you'd like to show.
In fact, among culturally and linguistically diverse communities in Australia, language and ethnicity are more important to their sense of self than nationality.
According to the Australia Talk survey, non-white Australians and those born overseas rank their language as the most important to their sense of self.
So if the majority of us are monolingual, it means that we're shutting ourselves off from learning about different cultures and communities. And there's only so far that Google Translate can take you.
It's not really understanding of what you're saying. And that's what the benefit is of learning a language. And Google Translate will never do that. Will never give you the understanding of sort of what's trying to make sense of what the culture is about.
So if you want to learn a new language, which ones would be the easiest ones to start with?
You often see languages such as French, Spanish and Dutch topping the list, with Mandarin, Japanese and Arabic at the other end. But really it depends on what languages you already know.
You can only answer this question in terms of what language you speak as a first language, because it's all relative.
To an extent, it depends on how much this new language has in common with languages you already know, and how complex its sounds and grammar are to you personally. Which is why you might find learning a new language more closely related to your own to be easier.
If I'm a Spanish speaker, learning Italian is really not very difficult.
For example, English belongs to a group of languages called the Germanic languages, which are part of the Indo-European language family. So if you're an English speaker, you might find these related languages easiest to learn, because the sentence structures are the most similar, and there are plenty of cognates, which are words derived from the same root. French and Spanish, some of the Romance languages, also share a lot of cognates with English, because of the massive influence French had on Old English. But if you're a Spanish speaker, perhaps you should try Filipino. Filipino shares many cognates with Spanish. If you speak Mandarin, you could learn another Chinese dialect. Japanese also wouldn't be so much of a jump, due to the fairly simple pronunciation and some shared written words in the form of kanji.
So learning a language similar to one you already know could come at an advantage, but there's so many other factors that could help you decide what to choose. Maybe you'd like to learn how to speak to your grandparents, or a language that a lot of people in your community speak. Or maybe you want to learn the language that will help you speak to the most people around the world. Or perhaps you want to learn for business or research purposes. Ultimately, it's up to you. There's no best or easiest language to learn. The most important thing is to keep practicing and to have realistic expectations.
One of the big problems with adults learning a second language is that you're going to sound funny, and people hate to sound funny. They hate to sound like an idiot. So when you're learning a second language, you got to go back to the beginning. You really, for a while, have to sound like a child. If you compare yourself to a native speaker, then you're always going to be frustrated and you're going to give up. But you can get to the point where you communicate.
So if you're monolingual in English, the good news is its global prominence means it's not going anywhere anytime soon. The bad news is, because it's a lingua franca, being monolingual will put you more and more in the minority, as more people pick up English as a second, third, or fourth language. Speaking another language not only opens up communication to a whole new community, it also opens up understanding to a whole new culture.
It's important to realize that it is difficult, but so is learning maths for most people, right? And if you took that attitude to lots of things, you'd go to the first year of school and you're like, that's hard, I'm going to quit that. Say, no, you have to keep doing it. And you do. And ultimately, there's a payoff.
We didn't get to touch on sign languages in the video, but they're also great options if you want to learn a new language. There's about 100 to 200 documented sign languages in the world, but there are probably more around. You can learn ASL if you're in the US, or Auslan if you're in Australia. And if you want to check out more results from the Australia Talks National Survey or take the online tool for yourself, we've left a link down below.